Okay. Hi, Manuel. Thank you for joining us as well.
Hello, everyone.
Just
Hiya.
waiting for Sarah and everybody else to come and join as well. Hello to everybody that is currently joining us on YouTube as well. It feels like it has been a long month between the last one of these and now.
Yeah, it really has. A lot's happened.
Yeah.
And yet, nothing at the same time.
That is true.
It's all the same. Aside from if you've just gone to Spain, and then it's,
Yeah. Poor Grant Shapps.
He'll survive.
Probably. I mean, you can't really use the excuse that he didn't know that it was coming either, did he? I mean, he's the transport secretary. Muppet. I really like your lighting, Tom. It's nice.
My lighting?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Got no outside light in here. Huh?
Oh no, it's just a window, but I'm close to it. You've got no outside light?
Yeah, I've got some windows, but it goes like it leads onto a lean-to.
Oh, right.
With some horrible corrugated plastic on top, which leaks. So yeah, no outside light. I don't know what it's like outside. It could be,
It's quite
thundering.
So I've got a window that's like half the length of the room next to me, but I've always got blinds down because it looks out onto the main road of my village. I just feel people are watching me all the time. So it's like I just like no.
Yeah, it's not what you need really.
Oh, and my cat's joined us.
Oh yay! Hello. There we go. I got its attention for a little bit.
Yeah.
What's its name?
This is George.
Hello, George. Welcome to the meetup. Hope you learn a lot. Enjoy yourself.
Hi. Hello.
Oh my God.
Sorry, that was me. I was testing a link and I forgot I was unmuted. And I forgot that it was you that's speaking. So it's going to be loud.
Yep, thanks. Sorry. I'll pipe down.
Right. Give everybody a few minutes to join us. It'll be okay. You're in Spain, aren't you, Manuel?
Yes, I'm based in Madrid. So, yeah, if this was in person, then I would have problem now to quarantine. So no, I'm based in Madrid, even though I'm originally from Portugal, from Lisbon, but I've been living in Madrid for about 10 years almost. So.
Oh,
nice. Cool. What's it like living there? Like I think I might be one of the few people who have just never been to Spain.
Well, outside the pandemic is pretty good. It's a nice city, you have everything, but truth be told, when you have kids, have two little boys, then it doesn't matter too much which city you live in, because it's just you go to parks and the supermarket, and that's basically it most of the time. But no, it's a nice city. Obviously, Barcelona gets a lot more attention, and it's beautiful. And Madrid is different, but there's a lot to see as well. So it gets very hot in the summer, so you don't really see my setup. But I have a fan right here, which has a silent mode so that I can speak and people don't hear this in the back. So that's useful. And without that, I would probably be fainting with too much heat. So don't visit in the summer after even after the pandemic come in spring or fall, it's pretty nice.
Is the Spider-Man still in Madrid Square?
I don't know which kind of characters are there now, but there's always some. Yeah.
There's I've been to Madrid once, and there was a Spider-Man dude that people would line up and pay to have their picture taken with. And it's one of the main things that I remember about Madrid.
Spider-Man, Mickey Mouse, you can find.
Oh, there's a whole group of them. Excellent.
Yep.
I thought it was just a lone wolf, Very good.
We'll give it a few more minutes for folks to join. And we'll get started.
I'm assuming we'll wait for Sarah.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I was going to go first, and then Sarah will join us more shortly. Just find where. Twitter is for that. Oh, they've changed all the YouTube studio as well. So there's now more information coming when things are live, which is interesting. I mean, I just like statistics and graphs, so that keeps me amused. I think there's also. Did we work out last time in terms of Meetup that it doesn't send people notifications based on a setting somewhere as well? I'm sure we did.
What's that, sorry?
With Meetup, like I know that Mark, we have to send the Zoom link to almost every time. But for some reason, I think there's other issues with it sending mail generally.
Randomly though, it never does it for Pete's. I always get the emails through for his meetups.
Yeah.
It's just you don't like me.
Certainly, it's annoying that you have to have the email notification turned on rather than just notifications. Seeing as I never check my email, I'd much rather it came through any other way of working.
On the app itself.
Yeah, seeing as that's how every communication I deal with comes through.
Yeah.
It threw me completely because I'm like, I've got notifications turned on. I can see they're turned on. But they're specifically saying an email got sent out. Right, okay. So I had to update 20 meetup groups to suddenly be able to see anyone.
Yeah, I know. It's a pain in the ass.
From an organizational point of view, I can't imagine because, yeah, there's always one or two messages on every meetup kind of going, yeah, no, nothing came through for me. And it does seem to be a little pseudo random.
Well, yeah, and you sort of don't know. And in terms of people joining Zoom as well, and this is one of the reasons, like we do the YouTube, is because it means that we can have people join without us getting Zoom bombed and that kind of thing. You know, like we've got a similar amount of people currently on YouTube watching as well. What I will do is I will see if there's a way we can get the Zoom stuff out. I don't think there's a setting in Meetup that I need to change. Is there, Pete? You know a little bit better than I do.
No. I mean, when
do
you
the whole contact members, people who are RSVP'd, yes.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah, no, there's nothing else. I always tick on the allow them to reply, but I mean, obviously, people must be checking their junk mail as well. But yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, DevOps Knots is never junk, Pete. Come on.
I think there's a little bit of rivalry there, to be honest.
To be fair, just checking again, and they did come through at 27 minutes past 6. So I don't know what time you actually sent them.
About an hour before.
Oh yeah, mine only arrived a few minutes before I came online.
Huh.
Okay.
Wonder why.
So, our learning from this, guys, is that I need to send it earlier in the day, just in case. Right. What I'll do is I'll send out another reminder just in case.
You put the link in the DevOps Slack channel.
Say again.
Maybe use the DevOps Knots Slack as well. Put it in there.
That is true. I don't think I'm actually on it on this PC. So I need to add that.
I can do that for you if you like.
Please. Copy that. Okay.
I think we're at T-1 minute, aren't we?
We are. Let me just make sure Sarah's getting on okay. Though she might be a little late joining us, but she should be here in time for when she needs to do hers.
Okay, as long as she's okay.
Right. So I think we're probably in a good place to get going. So I can do my little preamble bit that I usually do, which I'm sure everybody's really excited to hear. So welcome to July's DevOps Knots. This is our penultimate one before our first birthday next month.
Yay! Woo.
I would first of all like to thank our sponsors. Even through the pandemic at the moment, they have been absolutely stellar in helping provide the Zoom that we're on now with all the paid stuff that we need for that. JetBrains for continually providing us with a product key to give away, which you'll all be able to win later this evening, and stickers for providing as fantastic DevOps Not stickers. If you aren't already bored of hearing myself, Misha, Louise, Jonathan, or Pete talking, you can listen to us in the comfort of your very own home, car, or otherwise whilst you're running, and listen to our Agile Engineering podcast, where we're talking about all things DevOps, Agile, software related, from the concepts and principles through to things like whether or not DevOps should even be a job title and that kind of thing. That is available on pretty much all major platforms. There's 5 episodes of it so far. When we intend to be recording the next episode, we're taking a little bit of a break, but we intend to be recording the next episode for this tomorrow. And so giveaways. Like I said, we have this evening a JetBrains product license that you can win. That entitles you to a year's subscription of any JetBrains product. You can win that by sending a tweet out with the hashtag DevOps Knots. What we would like to hear about this evening is what's the worst production incident anybody has ever caused, and we'll pick one a winner at random later this evening. We are also looking for speakers always. At the moment we're looking to fill our speaker roster from sort of September onwards, and we're looking at how we do that in 2021 as well. You can get in touch with if you're interested with speaking by emailing us at contact@devops.co.uk or ping us on Twitter, or speak to Misha or myself individually on all the various platforms. And then tonight we have got two fantastic speakers for us. They're not actually in this order. I just forgot to update the slide. But joining us tonight, we've got Sarah Lean, who is a cloud advocate at Microsoft, coming to talk to us about hybrid Azure management, including things like the new Azure Arc, which I'm very excited about. And we also have Manuel, no, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but
Pais.
Yeah.
There we go. Who
like,
is,
if you have multiple pies. Very similar to that.
So we've also got Manuel Pais, who is one of the co-authors of what is, in my opinion, one of the essential reads for any modern software organization, Team Topologies. Come to talk to us about remote first team interactions for business and technology teams. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Manuel. I think I actually need to make you a co-host so that you can present, because I don't think I've done that yet.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation, first of all, Liam and the rest of organizers. And and thanks for your very nice introduction and short review of the book. So let me try to share my screen. It looks like it's working. Here we go. So you should be looking at my slides now. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. Actually, some people I've had contact on social media that I haven't really seen face to face. I can say that when I give a training and everyone has the camera off, that's really hard to make connection to the people. So it's nice to see some familiar faces. And so this talk is really about team interactions in this remote first world that we're in now, mostly because of the pandemic. So when lockdown started here in Madrid in March, and almost in most parts of the world, you saw a lot of content around how do we keep teams together in this, when they're working from home, what kind of, what changes, and people recommending not just to kind of shift and lift, but actually think in terms of the remote first approach that makes sense for the team. But everything was very focused on inside each team, right? Which makes sense. That's where you would expect to start. But we didn't see, or I didn't see much about what about interactions between different teams in this remote first way of working. How is that affected? What can we do to handle that? And so it turns out some of the ideas in our book, Team Topologies, we think can be quite helpful to address some of these issues. So very quickly, I'm just to share my background is in computer science, but I've had different roles from development, testing, QA, etc. That's my Twitter and LinkedIn, so feel free to connect. I'm always happy to exchange ideas. So when we're talking about remote work, all we need is Zoom and Slack or some similar tools, right? That's all we need for remote work. And I would expect many of you shaking your heads or going, being a bit puzzled that if you've done it even before pandemic or because of pandemic, then you know this is just, you know, it's just the basics. So you need some tools, obviously, and I would expect to see more evolution of these tools to fit the needs of remote working. But really the hard part is the rest, right? How do we establish things like psychological safety? I know Tom has written quite a lot or some posts about it that I found quite insightful. And essentially, what are the ground rules and kind of our shared agreement on how which practices we're gonna adopt and how we're gonna communicate and so on. You know, what are the working hours? You know, do we use video conferencing? When do we do that? When do we use email for what type of communication, etc. So these are the hard part about remote working, right? And so when we're thinking about different teams interacting remotely, the thing is, if we don't pay enough attention, this can actually cause a lot of more problems compared to people being in the same office. Because if you already had kind of problematic interactions, or, you know, either because didn't have enough interactions between teams or for whatever reason, if there was already some pre-existing difficulties, and you're trying to do some kind of transformation, whatever that is, DevOps transformation or digital transformation, the work from home, if we're not careful about how we're going to help teams interact and deal with those kind of frictions, it's just going to get worse, right? Again, it's not just having the tools, it's actually how do we set up the interactions between teams. So as I mentioned, this is the book, Team Topologies, and we saw that there are some particular, some of the ideas in the book that are particularly relevant for this kind of problems we're trying to address now. And so I'm going to talk about some of those. How do we handle team dependencies? How do we set boundaries between teams? Get them to interact in a more meaningful way? And finally, a quick section about growing feedback. So you can look at this as just pointers, is effectively to think about, you know, what are some of the things we might want to address to improve the interactions between teams. Dependencies between teams. So in the book, we actually talk a lot about minimizing dependencies, minimizing handovers, so we achieve faster flow. But it doesn't mean that we can really get to the point where you have teams with zero dependencies on other teams. That's very unlikely. So in this kind of remote first context, the first thing we need to do is understand who is working on what, right? So if we know we have dependencies, if we have more visibility around which team is working on what, that is the first step to kind of help us manage these dependencies. So one way to do that is through what we call a team API. So effectively interface to the teams, which has a inside out focus. That means the team is trying to make it easier for other teams to understand a number of things, among them what are we working on, what are the practices we follow, how do we prefer to interact with other teams for different types of communication needs. So if we're actually saying, you know, to make those effective interactions between teams and ownership of software and having clear boundaries between teams, we need to advertise and actually evolve this team API as we go. So it's kind of, again, it might be a very simple interface, like just a wiki page or whatever, where we are exposing to other teams, and therefore the idea of the API in relation to application programming interface, but at the team level, we're exposing how the team wants to be contacted, making that as clear as possible. So the kind of information we'd expect to see there includes what are the artifacts that the team is responsible for. If the team is actually delivering software, what are the versioning, testing approach, where's the documentation, examples, etc. What are the practices? Do we do pair programming or TDD, or do what, code reviews? How do we work as a team? And obviously the roadmap and the priorities in this context, particularly of understanding what other teams are working on, that we make it very clear what are the roadmap and priorities for our team. And then the communication preferences, which channels, which tools, and what time of the day, etc. So this effectively helps reduce the overhead for other teams to interact with us, right? So it's from our point of view as a single team, we're exposing and making it clear for others how to interact with us. This may sound very similar to a team working agreement, and it is. You would expect at least some of this information would be in a team working agreement. The key difference is a team working agreement is usually inwards facing. So we as a team decide and agree on how we like to work, what practices or tools, etc. And the team API is external facing, is helping other teams understand what we do and how we like to interact. So we actually have some simple templates and techniques on GitHub that you're free to use. And there's one which is a team API template. It's just an example of the kind of information you might expect to see in a team API, which is helping then the other teams interact with us. So once we have more clarity on what each team is doing and how they like to interact, where's their roadmap, etc., then it's useful to have some way of tracking dependencies between teams. So this doesn't have to be very complicated at all. So actually, there's another GitHub repository which has this example, this table you can see here. This is actually based on the idea from the original Spotify article or paper that originated the Spotify model. So Spotify model is another talk or another discussion, but they actually had some other ideas in there that were quite useful. So you can have a very simple spreadsheet or what have you, where what we're trying to do is just have an idea of what are existing dependencies between teams, and then how are those dependencies playing out? Are they kind of healthy? This doesn't really impact the teams, or this is slowing down the delivery for some teams, or is it a blocking dependency where often one team has to wait for the other to do something or respond to some request? So we start having an idea of what are the healthy dependencies. If they're not actually affecting our flow, our ability to deliver, then it's okay. We can keep those. Which are the ones that we probably need to do something about it? So a very simple way to start tracking this, and you might then kind of review this on a continuous basis, either whatever makes sense every month or every quarter, whatever you think it makes sense. And we can also see over time which dependencies are becoming, it looks like this dependency is becoming unhealthy in a way. It's causing us to slow down more often, or it's blocking us more often. And so we see that we need to address that. There are other ways to do this. So there's a book called Making Work Visible, which I highly recommend, around exposing dependencies between teams and other kind of problems that teams often face when they're trying to optimize their workflow. And so Dominica de Grandes, who wrote that book, she has some very practical ways in which you can also track dependencies. Obviously, if you're using some kind of board similar to this, where you would highlight dependencies in the board between our dependencies on other teams, you can still do this with virtual tools, or they might need to be adapted slightly. But that's a really good book around exposing dependencies and as the title says, making invisible work visible. Essentially, then whatever kind of approach or technique you use to start tracking dependencies, then we can what we really want to do is address them. Like I was saying earlier, eliminate blocking dependencies if we can, mitigate slow dependencies, and the ones that are doing okay, are not really harming our delivery, then we don't need to worry, unless they become unhealthy over time. So in the context of this talk, I'm giving some pointers. Obviously, when we're talking about reducing dependency between teams, there's a lot we could go into, and that's effectively one of the key goals, if you like, or ideas in the Team Topologies book. And the idea of, how can we turn dependencies that are during the execution of the work into dependencies that are more based on capabilities, where one team might be helping another team gain some capability or being able to do some things more independently. Another aspect to think about is how do we set up team boundaries? And in particular, understanding there are different trust levels depending on the size of the groups that people belong to. So you might be familiar with the work of Robin Dunbar, which people usually refer to as Dunbar's number. And so that refers to a result of his research. So he's an anthropologist at Oxford, and he found that the amount of meaningful relationships we can have as humans, not particularly in the workspace, but in general as humans, is around 100 to 200 individuals. So people usually refer to 150, the average, as Dunbar's number. And interestingly, recently he did the same kind of research applied to actual social media networks, and he found the same idea. So you might see someone on Facebook with 500 friends, but very likely they only have meaningful connections with 100 to 200 max. So this helps us think about how, what are the right boundaries around grouping teams as well. Ben Ford, who has interesting background in the military, and now he's in software development. He's a consultant in the UK. He had an interesting article where he was kind of applying or thinking about how this Dunbar number applied in the military. So there are actually other numbers that Dunbar talks about in terms of trust levels, where 8 or 5 to 15 actually is kind of the number you expect that you can have deeper trust. So that's usually the size of our teams, right? And there are different kind of trust boundaries that we can think about when we're organizing and grouping teams. Something a little bit like this, where perhaps at this 150 limit is where we should think about, well, if we're growing beyond 150, that means a lot of people are part of a unit, if you like, or whatever terminology you use, where they don't have meaningful connections with everyone. So it starts to set in this kind of us versus them mentality, where I might start thinking some decisions are being made by other people. I don't know, and I don't know why. So it's kind of good constraint to think about Dunbar's number in terms of how we group teams that are closely related. Essentially, the key point is the dynamics change, trust dynamics change when we cross these different boundaries. So we shouldn't expect people to behave in the same way when we're crossing and we're putting them into bigger and bigger groups. One of the case studies that we have in the book is from AutoTrader from the UK, where they very clearly applied these ideas around grouping teams and trying to promote the right type of interactions, make it easier for teams that are likely going to need to interact to, essentially sit together. What you see here are what they identified as 3 of their key business domains or value streams, if you like. And so what they did, and when they moved to this building, obviously years ago, was sit everyone, all the teams that are, for example, in the car leasing business domain on the same floor. So we're making it easier also with the way we set up our physical space for the teams who are likely to interact, to be sitting closely together. And so you might have engineering teams and marketing teams and sales teams. They're all sitting on the same floor. So it's an example of how they're trying to strengthen the trust between groups that are closely related groups of teams. So obviously now the question is, how does this apply in the virtual remote first world, right? So if we're using, obviously just is one example. If we're using Slack, but whatever chat tools you're using, Microsoft Teams or whatever, if we're a large organization, we have one giant Slack with, I don't know, 300 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, what happens then? Likely, a lot of people are going to feel a bit lost, right? So they're not going to feel like they belong to a group because there's so many people there that they don't have a direct connection with. They don't have a meaningful connection with. It's probably going to feel like there's a lot of noise, a lot of channels, a lot of conversations going on that we might not really understand if we should be part of, what should we be listening at, what should we be replying, which channel should we be actively following, etc. So it might be a lot of noise and the lack of direction for people in this kind of giant Slack. Is as if you would have a giant open space with everyone in the organization. Plus, people might just stand up and start shouting to the other side of the room. It's kind of the similar thing would be happening if you have just this giant Slack with little kind of guidance for people on how to interact. And so perhaps what we could do, thinking about Dunbar's number, is say, well, if we have groupings of teams that up to 150 or between 100 200 people, perhaps each of those groupings should have their own Slack. So we're promoting increased trust inside that group of 100 to 200 people. So in the example of AutoTrader, perhaps they would have different Slacks for each of their business domain areas, so that the teams inside the same Slack know that they're closely related, and it's easier to find people and teams that you need to talk to. And then we can also think about some guidance, some conventions to make it easier to find the right communication channels. So, this, again, just an example, where, if you look at the bottom left, well, first of all, you would expect each team to have their own channel, right? Unless the team prefers just to use video conference, for example. I know some teams like to have, video call always on. But you would typically expect each team to have their own channel or space in this whatever tool you're using. If you look at the bottom left, you might have also channels that promote certain types of interaction. So imagine stream team 1. So this is the terminology we use in the book. So you have a stream team 1 collaborating with a platform team, for example, around some monitoring service. Perhaps we're working together for a period of time to understand, how should this monitoring service look like? What are the needs of the stream team? And so we can set up a channel, a space where now both of these teams know exactly where the communication should happen, if that's how they want to work. And further, they can agree on, what times of the day are we going to be in real time kind of in this channel, so we can discuss together, or is it more synchronous, whatever it might be. But we are at least setting up a space for them to have those interactions. You might also have teams that provide support to others, so around, for example, logging service or other kinds of service. So obviously you'd expect if that team that provides support wants to do that via this tool, this chat tool in this example, then they should have a channel. So that makes it easy for the teams that need help around this service to know exactly where they have to ask for that. And at the individual level, you would expect people to identify with their, with their role and their team, and just, in their photos, so just to make it easier for people to identify with each other. So in that particular example, I was using terminology from the book, the Team Topologies that you see here, streamline teams, enabling teams, platform teams, etc. But whatever terminology you use, just having some kind of team-focused conventions can be quite helpful, compared to a little bit of, what can feel like a little bit of chaos if you just have huge virtual space where people don't really know where they have to go and where they have to respond. So again, just some initial ideas, some pointers of some possible conventions. This is not meant to be exactly what you would need. Just some, setting up some useful conventions for people to be able to navigate more easily, and reduce the noise and clarify the communication paths between individuals and teams. These conventions increase then the discoverability and reduced cognitive load on communication. So that means it reduces the effort for teams to find out where they need to communicate with others. And then when we have the interactions, we would like them to have a clear purpose and have a clear definition of, what is the interaction that's happening and why. So there's kind of I like to do a bit of myth busting around collaboration, which is, yes, it's one interaction mode where, everyone talks about collaboration, but we don't often specify it clearly enough that we can understand when should collaboration start and end. So what we shouldn't do is expect every team just to be able to, or we shouldn't expect every team to talk to everyone else, to every other team to do their work. That is not very efficient, right? We need interactions between teams, but we shouldn't have this idea that, well, it's just collaboration between all the teams, and whenever they need, they'll do it. We actually need more, or it's helpful to have well-defined interactions, especially in remote first approach that we're going through now. So the interaction modes, quickly, that we've identified in our experience and also from other organizations' experience, the three key ones that are needed are collaboration with a specific framing where, yes, two teams working together, but you have a specific purpose. You have a goal. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the solution you're trying to discover that requires the two teams to collaborate? And also, for which period of time are you expecting this to last, this collaboration to last? And we don't have to get it exactly right. We're all, in general, pretty bad at estimating, but at least having kind of a sort of idea of what's the timeline. Is it we expect for 2 weeks to be collaborating, or for 2 months, once a week or every day, just setting some clarity, increasing clarity around what we're expecting. X as a service is where one team provides a service that another one consumes. So if you think about AWS or any other, or Azure or other cloud providers, all their services are kind of, the interaction mode is X as a service, right? We expect to be able to consume those services, and that they are reliable and easy to understand enough, and they have proper documentation so that we can just consume them without actually having to talk to an engineer at AWS, which probably is going to be very hard to get in touch with, unless you're Netflix or some other very big client. And so internally, we should be thinking about this as also one of our interaction modes, where this is very common in platform teams that are providing services to other teams internally, but it might be also, other types of services that are provided internally in the organization, where you have internal customers. It requires, however, the service to be of a high level of usability and reliability to actually have this X as a service working correctly. And finally, the last interaction mode is facilitating, where one team is helping another one gain some skills, improve their capabilities, and again, over a period of time. We should set a clear objective for this interaction mode. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to help with? And for how long we expect this to happen. Once we have the interactions in place, and we have a better understanding of, first of all, what are the teams that are interacting, and then what are the types of interactions, we can start to have something like what you see here in this diagram, where actually this is a snapshot in time. So it's not a model or any kind of static view of the organization, but it's it's a snapshot. It's a photograph where we see right now we have 2 stream-aligned teams in this part of the organization. The stream-aligned team on top is collaborating with a complicated subsystem team. Perhaps we're working on a new version of this subsystem, and so we need to collaborate to actually understand what the stream-aligned team needs, what are the features or the changes they need, and how should they look like in a very quick discovery approach, where you actually have the 2 teams collaborating closely to identify what should that look like, this new version of the subsystem. At the same time, we see an enabling team. So again, I'm not going into a lot of details about the topologies, but enabling team is typically a team of experts that's facilitating knowledge to another team. So they might be experts around some domain like continuous delivery or UX or product development, whatever it might be. They are facilitating and helping the stream-aligned team gains knowledge around that domain of expertise. And then we also see that both stream-aligned teams are consuming the platform or some platform services. But the key here is to understand that we can start having much better kind of organizational view of what is happening now. What are we trying to do in terms of interactions? What is the goal of these interactions? And then remember, I talked about the team API. So this is something that could also be part of the team API, clarifying, in the current moment, with which teams are we interacting with. So from the point of view of stream-aligned team 1, for example, we could have this type of information in the team API, where we're saying, well, we're collaborating. We're collaborating here in the second row. We're collaborating with a face recognition complicated subsystem team. The purpose is to identify some or define some response errors and workflows that where we're facing some issues on face recognition. We expect this to last for 2 months, 1 day per week. And this might turn out that it takes longer or it takes less time, but at least we have a perspective internally for the stream-aligned team 1, but also anyone else that wants to understand, what is happening, what are the interactions that are taking place. And then some of these interactions might turn out that we didn't reach the purpose that we were trying to do in the collaboration or facilitation, or something else went wrong. We expected to collaborate for 2 weeks and it took 3 months. And we can use this awkwardness in team interactions as sensing mechanism to evolve. So that we can try to understand why did this interaction not turn out as we expected. And sometimes it might just be that, well, we needed more time. We thought it was going to be, we're going to discover the solution in 2 weeks, and it took 4 weeks, and maybe that's fine. But other times we might realize that there are other issues we need to address. Perhaps we're trying to facilitate a team where actually they have other gaps that we need to address first. So we're trying to help them understand continuous delivery when they don't even understand continuous integration yet, something like that. So we kind of, set up an interaction that didn't meet its goal. So we can use that to try to evolve. And then we want to clarify the communication purpose and channel. So we've already talked about this briefly in terms of the setting up the virtual space in ways that help people navigate and help people understand with whom and in which ways should they interact. But also, and in particular for kind of platform teams, so this is another GitHub repository, which it's again a template, just some ideas of what kind of information a platform team might include and expose to other teams around, what services are provided by the platform, where's the documentation, what is the response time, and a lot of things that help other teams then when there is a problem with the platform service or when they need some help. It makes it very much easier to find that information. So these types of details and especially around communication channels. And the reason why I'm talking particularly for platform teams or teams that provide many services or multiple services internally to other teams is probably they're going to have different types of communication happening with those teams. So they might have incidents where they will ask teams to communicate via perhaps a Slack channel or by phone so that we can respond as quickly as possible. Or, we might have other types of communication in terms of, they're just asking for help understanding a service or providing feedback, and then perhaps other channels more synchronous are useful. And so whatever this platform team or whatever team prefers and finds that is a good way to set up these interactions, that should be made as clear as possible. So this is an example of such a kind of template that could be used. And finally, the last bit I want to talk about quickly, but a very important one is how do we grow feedback? So in the remote first approach, where there's normally less interactions between different teams because we're not meeting each other by accident at the coffee machine or in the kitchen, so we need to be even more kind of proactive, intentional about growing feedback. And of course, we're talking about constructive feedback. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details. There's a lot of good resources out there how to do that. But this is actually a skill, and many teams are not very proficient at it, or they haven't really tried to improve their skill in terms of constructive feedback, especially to other teams. Perhaps inside the team, they have come to an agreement and they're doing retrospective and they're hopefully having good communication inside the team. But often between different teams, there's not very intentional ways of getting and providing feedback. So one very quick example from a company called Twilio in the US. So their platform team, for example, what they do is send out a survey on a regular basis to all the internal teams that use the platform to kind of understand their satisfaction and get some feedback around, do you feel like the platform is helping you do the things that you need to do around building, delivering, and running your services, and you feel that it's compelling, that it's we're listening to your feedback and we're improving the platform according to that. And so it's a very easy way just to intentionally get feedback on a regular basis from the other teams. So this is a very simple technique, but whatever works for you, but being more intentional about growing feedback between teams is quite important. And finally, today what I've presented are essentially ideas and things you might try out based on your own experience in your organization, kind of problems you see between, especially interactions between different teams. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to try some of these things, see what works and what doesn't in this remote context, and going to have to experiment and see what is being more effective for your own teams, organizations. What I hope you get, if there's only one thing you get out of this talk, I hope is the need to address and to think about how are team interactions changing in the remote context, where we have given, and rightfully, a lot of attention to interactions inside teams, but perhaps not as much between different teams. And so if we're not careful, those interactions between different teams can deteriorate and actually make it much harder to do any kind of improvements and transformations inside organizations. So a few quick resources. So besides the book, we're actually working on a free workbook. So this will be a PDF free to download. We're expanding on this talk and with some more examples and applying team topologies for remote teams. We keep saying it's coming soon, but it's been delayed a few times. But hopefully in September it will be out. If you want to hear about it, we have newsletter or on social media. If you look for Team Topologies, you'll find our accounts. We also ourselves moved, of course, all our training and our consulting work remotely. So now there's a set of training half-day courses that are available live online around different aspects of team topologies, where we deep dive and we have exercises and case studies. And the same for assessments. So if you're interested in any of that, just look at teamtopologies.com. Here are some resources. So we actually have a page where we assembled some of these resources around remote first interactions, and just the other link on github.com/teamtopologies have these templates I talked about around Team API and a platform template, etc. So thank you very much. I hope it was useful for you, and I don't know if we'll have time for Q&A, William.
Yeah, there's definitely time for some questions. I'm going to be slightly selfish and go first, if that's all right with everybody. In terms of getting like a lot of this talk has been around remote first team interactions and stuff like that. Do you see in a world where potentially we do end up going back into offices and stuff like that more, because I do think that it's potentially becoming more of an if rather than a when at this stage. But do you see those interactions having to change again once we get back to being in the office, or do you think that the remote first approach would make more sense to go with still, with the idea that what the likely outcome would be is that, in my opinion at least, is that people would be spread between office and remote more than they are today?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Obviously, we will have to see what really happens, but the kind of what most people think is what will happen is what you're saying, that it will be a mix of people working in the office some days of the week and others working from home. I think what I would expect is then when companies are moving to this remote first approach, that they don't go back. So even if you have people in the office, if we expect that we won't have the whole team most of the time in the office together, then if you have just some team members occasionally, then you expect them to be you expect the whole team to be working in this remote approach. That was actually, I've seen some examples where before pandemic, where companies supported remote working, but kind of partially, or you just had one team member or a couple of team members that were working remotely, that often caused problems because then most of the interactions were in person, and those people were sometimes left out a little bit, not intentionally, but just because the interactions were happening mostly in person. And so it actually takes concerted effort to take this remote first approach. And I think now that we're kind of forced to do it, I would expect afterwards, like I say, if people go back to the office, that this will stay. But again, we'll have to wait and see.
Cool, thank you very much. Do we have any more questions for Manuel at all, either from YouTube or here in Zoom?
You actually kind of stole my
Oh, did I? Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just I've actually been in that very situation that you just described, Manuel, like where I've been the only remote worker for most of the week, and yeah, it was quite isolating because we didn't have systems set up to be able to include me. I really wanted a remote presence robot, like on Big Bang Theory, so I could just kind of like scoot around. Never got that. And yeah, so I was just wondering if there were any kind of hints or tips that you've seen, like to kind of compensate for maybe one or two members of staff being remote where everyone else is in an office. But
I think the first step is just having that awareness that it's actually quite hard if only one person or two are working remotely, if you don't as a team agree on how we're going to handle this. And now we've been forced to do that and forced to clarify how is the communication remotely for everyone in the team is especially around things like decision making and what do we document and what is asynchronous versus synchronous, and teams that don't clarify that are struggling because you have different expectations even inside the team. So now we've been kind of forced to do that, and I think that at least that awareness that it's not just about having tools and having the access, actually how do we communicate internally in the team, and how do we clarify our ways of communicating.
Yeah, no, that's really good, thank you. Yeah, it's nice now that everybody's actually had to experience it as well. It's actually been really nice for me, like during lockdown, to have everybody else be remote as well, so that they can try to think about those kind of things. So hopefully when it does go back, it will be more kind of inclusive, and people will think about me a bit more.
We hope so. We've seen also with the training, for example, where before it would be very hard for a client to say, oh, okay, we'll do remote online training, and now it's yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that sort of issue just as we went into lockdown. I'd written a Docker workshop for a client, and planned for everything to be in person and get it all up to be in person, and then oh shit, so had to very quickly rework all of that.
I think we're also seeing some of the tooling is going to help. I think in particular for training, what I've seen is people becoming more creative about how can we make it inclusive for everyone that's in the training when they're remote, and we cannot have the same in-person interaction, but how can we make it easier for people to participate in the workshop with tools like Miro or Mural, etc. And I think we're still going to see more evolution. So back to your question before, then if people go back to the office, I would expect they're still using these tools and they're still thinking in a more kind of remote inclusive way, I would expect. But again, we'll have to see.
Cool. Thank you very much. Okay. One last call for any more questions.
I had a quick question, if it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Manuel. And it was a more generic one, but perhaps has got connotations with the remote piece. When you're in organisations with quite large engineering teams, how do you see kind of the overlay of leadership, coaching, that kind of thing when you've got largely autonomous teams that map against the team topologies ideas?
That is a a big question, let's say. What we've seen with team topologies is actually different organizations have different entry points. So we're starting to see. So if you're a smaller organization, and we gave a talk a few weeks ago at the DevOps Enterprise Summit with some industry examples. For small organizations, it's easier to take a more holistic approach, if you like, and say, well, we want autonomous teams, and we're applying some of the ideas in team topologies, and you kind of have the buy-in from leadership to do that. But in other organizations, especially large organizations, what we see is that teams might start with some easier to implement aspects like the team API, where it's essentially up to the team. Do we want to have a team API to clarify this aspects of how we work for other teams? So they might start that there. You start to see, perhaps in parts of the organization where they're adopting the topologies. So we don't expect the topologies to mean another kind of big reorganization, but they start to align teams and say, well, this team is mostly, for example, a stream aligned team. They're mostly working on end-to-end delivery of value to customers. So, and kind of the gaps are this. So they start to think about in terms of the types of teams and what is missing in terms of capabilities, and start to set that up. But yes, at some point, you might kind of face if the organization and the structure is very hierarchical and very rigid, then you will start to face some barriers to how much you can do. So it depends. We're starting to see now large organizations that want to adopt team topologies more broadly. So we're working with some of those. But I think you can always see, if you like, pockets of adoption where we're starting with kind of easier, quicker wins, if you like, around clarifying interactions between teams, which should not need kind of leadership to decide on that, right? But there are different levels of autonomy that teams have and leeway in terms of deciding how they work. And that's where, especially in the remote aspect, a lot of people have warned that if you have very hierarchical command and control structure and just trying to transport that to remote, asking people to be in Slack from 9 to 5 and to answer every message within 10 minutes and to tell you when you're going for lunch, that's not going to be a very effective in general, and definitely not to adopt some of these ideas.
Okay, apology. A follow-up question, if I can. And so when you think about the concept of the teams being streamlined, enabled, etc., those organizations that you're working with, we're struggling with exactly the same thing, by the way, because we are trying to apply some of these principles in a 300+ engineering team. And one of the questions that I'm puzzling over at the minute is how do we align the kind of leadership, career development, coaching? Do we sort of say, here you go, Mr. Coach or Mrs. Coach, you have those 3 streamlined teams, or you have a bunch of people spread across the organization because actually the penetration will be better, or you'll influence in a different way. So if you've got examples of real organizations that are trying this out or struggling, I'd be really keen to hear some sort of practical feedback on that.
Yeah, so we'll be adding more examples. So if you go to teamtopologies.com, there's already some industry examples. What I expect, but it's something that it doesn't happen also, obviously from one day to another, is for those kind of roles to become more enablers across teams to help identify gaps, help identify, well, actually, we should have an enabling team for this area, or helping the teams move to this way of thinking about their topologies and their interaction modes, and helping kind of cross-team enablement, if you like, helping them understand why these interactions are important, and helping identify gaps and how to move forward. But it's a bit early to say how this looks like in practice, but we're working with some organizations where, hopefully we'll be able to put out some industry examples how they did that.
Cool. Thank you. Good to see you again, by the way.
And nice to see you.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Manuel. As best a virtual one as we can give, I'd love to be able to give you a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So what we'll probably do at this point is we'll take a brief 5-minute comfort break for everybody to get new tea, beer, whatever. And we'll pick up again in 5 minutes. So what is it now? It's 7:43. So let's say we'll pick up at 10 to 8, actually, if that's okay. And Sarah, you're here now, aren't you? I think?
Yes, she is.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Cool.
Yay.
Cool. Okay. Just as we go into the break, obviously you don't have to speak. You can stay around and chat as well. Quick reminder for those in the Zoom call and everybody watching on YouTube. We have a giveaway this evening for a JetBrains product license. What we're looking for is a tweet telling us what's the worst production incident you may have been the instigator of in your career with the hashtag DevOps Nuts, and we'll pick a winner later this evening. Cool. And once again, thank you to Manuel. I know that he's going to have to shoot off now. But thank you very much for making the time to join us.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Manuel. Bye.
Bye.
So yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, it was fab.
I've just been reading the book again as well, actually.
Oh, cool. I've not read it yet.
It's really good. Really, really good.
I'll have to have a read.
Lots of diagrams, which is fantastic.
I love a good diagram. Excellent.
They've got a site. I don't know if it's changed since the books come out as well. But I'm gonna pop this into Teams. Not Teams. Zoom. Sorry, that's a habit. But that's got like anti-patterns in there as well, like creating DevOps teams as a silo is an anti-pattern and so on. And then team topology options, and how effective they can be, and how not to fall into some of the anti-patterns as well.
Oh, cool. Yay. Yeah, it's good to be able to talk to clients and stuff about this kind of stuff, but also to use it for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this, irrespective of the fact that, a lot of us here, I assume a lot of us here work in tech teams in some way or other. But I guess it's a lot of what we were just listening to applies to any business, especially any business that's working remotely right now as well.
Yeah, definitely. Right, getting it slowly.
Okay. That's all. Your Alexa NuGet package is you've updated, Stephen, recently.
I don't know.
No, Alexa, no. You're muted, chat.
There we go. Yeah, and that's exactly why I make sure I wear headphones, because
I got bored of wearing a headset like a month into working remotely, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, as so many of my conversations involve talking about the Echo, it does. Yeah, it is now a force of habit for me to call it the Echo as well, just to stop triggering her, because I've got one underneath my monitor. So
yeah, that's exactly what mine is.
Yeah, but yeah, the Alexa Live conference was last week, so there has been a lot to update. So yeah, they announced a lot of new functionality for skilled developers, and yeah, there was a lot of .NET stuff. Being able to mix audio finally, so background noise,
cool.
speech, be able to do fade in, fade outs, volume control of MP3s, that kind of thing. So that was a big deal. Made some of the games more interesting. So, and I'm just starting to read up on how they're allowing developers essentially to tag conversation threads so that they can apply machine learning to it. So it doesn't have to be exact textual matches, which is normally what we have to do at the moment. So it can be a little bit more vague. People can change their mind about specifics, and your skill doesn't have to handle the back end logic of that. They're doing it for you. So
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious they're aiming for the mobile space at the moment. A lot of their samples were involving things like the TikTok app and that kind of thing. So basically, instead of having Google or Siri on your phone, you would say, "Hey Alexa," and then trigger a mobile application. So deep linking, being able to subscribe to skills straight from mobile apps, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that would be like just to have one voice assistant across the board.
Yeah,
would be great. I mean, I know they do one for cars now as well.
Yep. Yes, the auto's a weird bit of kit. I wish somebody had more idea about how it worked from the IoT side, to be honest, because I know it's an 8-speaker array, so that it can cancel out the engine sound.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I expect it's probably not going to be long before it's an option as a voice assistant built into car systems. Like I know on my car, you can say like, "Hey BMW" and stuff like that. But if saying "Hey BMW," you feel like a bit of a knobhead.
Yeah, it's. I know. They announced a few.
Hello
months
Mercedes
back.
is the other one.
Yeah, and this is it. Is they're all starting to build up, and it's Amazon trying to get a deal with the right. I think they've got some makes of Ford are going to be having it in the next 6 months, which seems to be like an initial foray into that with a couple of models. But yeah, with so many different car manufacturers doing it, I do wonder how long it is before they can't keep up with the kind of technology pace Amazon have got in that space. So they just go, yeah, we'll just give it to that instead. So
I mean, it's the speed at which that's moving is incredible, and the same with I know that there's not so much I mean, there's obviously Cortana in terms of Microsoft, but the speed at which cognitive services is moving as well is incredible. It's like it feels like there is something new every other day. I've not even had the opportunity to scratch the surface of with a lot of them yet.
No, and the work that the teams are doing is being wrapped in such a developer-friendly environment and a set of APIs. So there is a huge amount of complexity that they just hide away and make incredibly usable. The journeys that they have thought of to make that kind of stuff easy for us is great. But then you hear the teams who very rarely get that kind of spotlight put on them when you talk about things like natural language processing or image processing and machine learning, and the passion they have for it. You can see why it moves that fast. So
yeah, sure. Yeah. Right. Well, I think most people are back. I've seen people returning in terms of YouTube. So we've had Manuel come to talk about the remote first team interactions, and now we have Sarah Lean, who is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, kindly joining us to come and talk to us about something I'm really excited about. Like I've been looking forward to this since she agreed to it. To come and talk about hybrid Azure management. So a big welcome to Sarah. Oh, I need to make you a presenter so you can actually present things. That would help.
It's useful.
Okay. Should be sorted.
Cool. Awesome. So yes, as Liam said, I'm going to be talking about hybrid Azure and some of the functionality and the management and the tools around that. Now, just a quick intro if no one knows me. My name is Sarah Lean, and as Liam said, I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. Now, the cloud advocate role at Microsoft is a really varied one. We do lots of different things. We actually sit in the Azure engineering team. So one of our objectives and one of our kind of remit is to take feedback, good and bad, from our customers or community and feed that back into the engineering team so as that they can either make the product better or, you know, I don't know, take that feedback on board and do something with it. So that's one of the remit of my job. Also speaking at engagements like this, writing blog posts, writing documentation, just trying to answer the gaps that some of our community has, because we know there is some gaps in our documentation and stuff like that. So that's partly my role. I'm also the founder of the Glasgow Azure user group, and we've also taken our events online. So if anybody hasn't seen that event, please do come and join us next month for our meetup. Now, I'm an IT pro. I've started in the IT industry as an IT pro. I was very much that server hugger person. I spent my days in server racks, racking those up. I've spilt many a pint of blood on those horrible little server cage nuts that we all had to deal with. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I made that transition into the cloud and started to look at Office 365 and Azure. And that's kind of the journey that I've been on. And that's why I love talking to customers about as well. So you'll often find me talking about helping customers on that journey from hosting their servers on-prem into the data centers in Azure. And the customers are moving for various different reasons, right? We've got ones moving for software and hardware refresh issues. They're maybe having capacity issues. You know, they've reached all that, the square footage in their data center and they can't put anything else in it. Or even just that the third-party data center that they are currently looking at is expiring and they're looking at different options. They're thinking about, you know, looking at different things, whether they keep it on there or they move to the cloud or they do the hybrid model. And to be honest, we're seeing a lot of customers talk about the hybrid model and they're wanting to integrate, not only have services on-prem and in the cloud, they're wanting those two locations and two environments to be manageable from one location. Nobody wants to have double tools for everything, right? You don't have to have a monitoring tool for your cloud services and then a monitoring tool for your on-prem services. You really just want that one pane of glass, which is a horrible phrase, but that's kind of what we want to be able to manage all of our environments, right? So I'm going to talk a bit about that today and talk about some of the services you can actually use to stretch from the cloud and give your on-prem environment a bit more functionality as well. So the first thing I want to talk about and mention just briefly is the Windows Admin Center. Now, Windows Admin Center is a pretty cool tool that we give everybody for free, and it allows you to manage your Windows servers. So back in the day when I looked after IT, I often had a whole host of windows open during the day. So I had multiple MMC windows open, I had multiple remote desktops open, you name it, I probably had millions of them open to manage all of these servers, right? What Windows Admin Center does is make use of all those tools into one window. So it's a browser-based tool, and you can access all your servers from there, and you can access a lot of the things from there as well. And it's not just on-prem stuff. So Windows Admin Center has capabilities to expose some of the Azure services you can enable for your on-prem servers. And we'll see that later in some of the demos that I'm going to use. Now, the last figures that the team shared with us, they were saying that they globally were managing over 3 million servers with Windows Admin Center. So it's definitely a tool that's growing in popularity. So if you haven't looked at it, please do, because it might make your life a little bit easier as well. Now tonight, I want to talk to you about that fictional company, Tailwind Traders, that you've probably heard Microsoft employees talk about before. Now, Tailwind Traders have their on-prem environment and they're looking to grow into the cloud. But again, they want to have it manageable and efficient for their staff. So let's cover off some of the areas that they're having issues with and want to use Azure and on-prem with. Now, the big one that we all have to deal with, regardless of what industry we're in or what our size of our company is in, or even if we just have things on-prem in our own house, is disaster recovery, right? We want to mitigate against something going wrong in our environments, either by a physical action or by, you know, somebody accidentally doing something. Currently, Tier 1 traders have this environment for their disaster recovery that's a bit complex, a bit inflexible, and really doesn't meet their needs. It's not far enough away. Their secondary site isn't far enough away from their primary site, so they're looking for something else. And what they want to use is actually Azure Site Recovery. So I'm going to show you a little demo of what Azure Site Recovery can do for you. So we have our Windows admin console here, and we're managing this server called Hyper-V01, which hosts a bunch of virtual machines. So if we go into the virtual machine panel, what we can see here is the inventory of the servers on this Hyper-V server. And we want to protect those servers using Azure Site Recovery. And we can do that from within Windows Admin Center really easily. We can click on the server, we click on More, and then we click on Protect the VM. Now, we've already set up Azure Site Recovery, so the screen, if you haven't got Azure Site Recovery already set up, will look slightly different, but you'll be asked to log into your Azure subscription, pick an Azure Vault, etc., etc. So it's slightly different if you've already got it set up. But here we protect the VM, and ultimately what we're doing is taking a copy of that virtual machine and putting it up into Azure. And from there, we can spin it up, we can do test failovers, we can, you know, run it up in Azure. We could migrate it up into Azure using this functionality as well, although we now have a specific tool to do that migration. But the functionality is there. It's now created Azure as our secondary site. So if something went wrong with that virtual machine on-prem, we can actually start to use it in Azure, and we could use that as a failover. Now, within the Azure portal, we can see what's happening with that virtual machine. We can see if it's protected. We can see when it was last protected. So this one was synced about 5 seconds ago in this video, and we can edit some of the settings. So when Azure Site Recovery copies that virtual machine up into Azure, it takes the settings that it currently has. So in this case, 4 cores, 4 gig of RAM, and 1 NIC. We can actually change that. So if it was running a bit sluggish on-prem, and when we failed it over, we wanted a bit more grunt around what that virtual machine does, we could change it and have a bigger virtual machine as well. So there's that flexibility as well within it. And you can see we have the options to do a planned failover. So if we know that the disaster recovery event's about to happen, we can fail over if something really goes wrong and we didn't know it was planned, or we could use the test failover and again, test that functionality like you all should be doing with your disaster recovery plans. So then some of the things that you want to think about when you're thinking about Azure Site Recovery is, like I said, we have that planned and unplanned failover mode. We also have the test plan, like I said, so that we can test the disaster recovery and know what our procedures should be should something happen. Now, when we do fail over in our disaster recovery environments, there's often things that we have to do in a certain order. We have to maybe start a server before another server. So you might have to start your database server before your application server. You might have to start certain services on a server in a certain order. And that can be really stressful, right? If you've just had a major outage and you've got your boss screaming at you and 100 users phoning your help desk saying something's gone wrong, you might miss a step, right? We're all human, it can happen. What we can actually build is recovery plans that can automate some of that. So you can say, I want that SQL server spun up first, then once it's up and running, you can then spin up your application server. And likewise, you can set up a script that starts up the services that you need to. So there's lots of automation in this as well to try and make the process efficient and try and avoid any mistakes. And we can also fail back over. So often once you fail into that secondary site, you might want to go back to your first site, right? So say the electricity went out or your internet connection went out, whatever it may be, that will get resolved at some point, but you might not want to run everything in Azure all the time. So we can fail back. So you can bring those virtual machines and all the new data back on-prem as well. And we have the capabilities for your RPO and your RTO down to seconds and minutes. So it should be within anybody's reach. Now, patch management is something, again, I had to look after when I was looking after lots of IT systems, and I'm sure we probably all have to do that, whether it be servers in our home environments or servers within our work environment. We often have to apply them on Patch Tuesday or on the Linux machine cycle as well. And it can be quite onerous, right? We've probably all sat in data centers at 3 a.m. in the morning, having to apply patches, restart servers, check that they've come back up, all of that good stuff. And that's an issue that Tailwind traders have as well. So they have Windows servers, they have Linux servers, and they have those servers split into the two environments. So they currently use WSUS, which actually manages their Windows servers. Now, WSUS could be used to manage their Windows servers on-prem and in the cloud, but it doesn't cover their Linux ones. So they want to look at a new solution to do that. And that's where Azure Update Management comes into play. Now, Azure Update Management is actually, I want to say, hidden away within our Azure automation accounts, and it's a free service built into that tool. And you can use that to update your Windows, your Linux, your Azure servers, your on-prem servers, or even servers that live in another cloud. We don't discriminate against where your servers are. And we can do that scheduling of your servers. You can patch them whenever you need them. And it gives you that one single pane of glass. So the tool actually also integrates with WSUS or SCCM, although I don't think it's called SCCM anymore. But if you have that on-prem already, you could leverage this and your existing tools on-prem to kind of extend that service as well. Let's have a wee look at what it actually looks like when we're in the Azure portal now. So here we have our automation account within Azure, and we'll see there's a blade called Update Management. Now, Update Management also leverages log analytics, so we need a workspace. So we can either create one or use an existing one. In this example, I'm going to create a new one. So it takes a few minutes to create, but once it creates, we can then refresh it and start to look at actually onboarding some of our servers. There are two ways to onboard your server. If you have an Azure virtual machine you want to onboard, you can click on that little button. If we click on Add Non-Azure Machine, it actually takes us to the documentation explaining that you have to install the log analytics agent to be able to use Update Management. So what we want to do is go into our log analytics, and we want to go into the agent management blade. And this is where we'll get the download file or the agent install for our servers. Now you have the Windows one and you have the Linux one. Now I'm onboarding one server, so I can afford to download that exe and do the next type thing. But really, if you are onboarding, your whole server estate, you probably want to look at scripting it, and we have documentation that can cover that off as well for you. So again, it takes a few minutes for this agent to install, and I often say reboot it if you can after the install, as it just speeds up everything, kind of registering and making that connection. But now the agent's installed, we can go back into the Update Management panel and we can start to manage those machines. We can start to add them to the schedule. Now I'm ticking enable for all machines and even ones in the future, so that means that any server I onboard into that log analytics space will automatically get onboarded into Update Management as well. So it saves me a few clicks later on. Now we see here that we've got a couple of servers onboarded into our environment, and what we want to do is start to schedule these patch updates. Now you have to have a patch update deployment for your Windows servers and one separate for your Linux. And I probably look at trying to split them into groups, trying to split up, your production workloads, your development workloads, even splitting them up into different app environments as well, so that you can configure it right down to what you need. You can stop certain update classifications being applied. You can have pre and post scripts runnings to, again, start and stop services, to do any of that manual kind of tasks that you do when you're ready to do your Patch Tuesday kind of schedules. You can set this up to happen, every day, every hour, every week, every month. There's a lot of flexibility here as well for you. Now, what I want to talk about here is actually the maintenance window. Now, you have a box where you can put in maintenance minutes, and that shows that the update tool can actually think about how long it's got to apply those updates. So you might only be able to take your server down for maybe 2 hours or 3 hours because of its production value. You know, you can't expect it to be down for 5 or 6 hours, regardless of how many patches you need to install. So having that maintenance window just kind of controls how update management applies these patches. So if it has, say, 100 patches to apply to that server, it probably couldn't do them all in that 120 minutes. So it basically stops it so as that it doesn't take it outside that maintenance window and your server it's up when you expect it to be up. We also have the capability of rebooting the server or not rebooting it, depending on how you want to do that. So again, that's where grouping your servers into different groups and having different deployments for the patches can actually be quite powerful as well. Now, the next tool I want to talk about is our file servers. So Tailwind traders have some file servers, like we probably all do. And again, their capacity on-prem is starting to run out. So rather than invest more in some hardware, they're actually going to use Azure File Sync, which will allow them to add on a bunch of capacity, and functionality as well. So let's have a wee look at what that actually looks like. So they have this office in New York and they have a file server there, and the users all connect into it, the applications all connect into it. It doesn't do anything except being a file server. Now, what they want to do is set up an Azure File Sync service in Azure. So what that will allow them to do is use something called cloud tiering. So as I said, they're running out of space on-prem, and rather than add on additional hardware, they're going to enable cloud tiering. So what that will do, it will take all the files up into Azure, put a copy into the file share within the Azure region, and it will take a bit of a cache of what's happening on-prem. Now you can configure this. So you can say that you want to have the most used files within the last 30 days on-prem, and then take them away basically from on-prem. Now don't worry, you're not actually taking them away, you're leaving a bit of a cache. So if you've ever used OneDrive where you right click on it and say free up space so that it's not on your laptop or your desktop, but it's still in the cloud, and if you double click on that folder or that file, it downloads it and lets you access it. That's basically what cloud tiering is in the Azure file world. Although hopefully the marketing product teams won't hear that. But that's really what that functionality is. We just call it cloud tiering when we're talking about enterprise. Now, the next thing that this allows them to do is actually allow the servers that they have in Azure access to that file share. So if their servers need to access some kind of folders or files in the file share, they can use the one in Azure. They don't have to come all the way back down the company internet line to New York to grab the data and then pull it all the way back up into Azure. They can actually just access the files closest to them in Azure. Now what we have is a secondary office in Seattle and a secondary file server. So what we can do is actually have all those files copied between the 3 locations. And again, we can set up cloud tiering so that we can only have the most used files in Seattle on that server, again, trying to utilize the space that we have on-prem. And to save on the backups, what we can actually do is back up the files directly from Azure. So if we're using Azure Backup, what we really don't want to be doing is probably taking the backup on-prem, because again, that will be sucking up internet bandwidth. We can back up straight from the file share in Azure. So again, we're taking the backup straight from the nearest location from it, and again, saving us hopefully some time and some internet bandwidth. Now, if something went wrong with one of these file servers, we can actually rapidly deploy it again from the file share that's living in Azure. We just spin up a new server or reuse an existing one, point it to the file share, make it part of the file share group, and it will pull down again the files that it needs to. So you can quickly, hopefully, get back into working practice as well. Obviously caveat that with if you're pulling down large amount of files, large amount of data, and you've only got a small internet connection on that site, it can maybe take a wee while, but hopefully the aim is to get you back up and running quite quickly. So let's actually see how that works in a demo. So we have this file server here, and we have a folder called FileShare01. We can see it's got some files in it, some folders, some really super important files in it as well. And it just looks like a normal file server, right? So if we go into the Azure portal, we can see we've already created up this file sync group, and we've already added in this server into the file share group. What this ultimately is, though, is a storage account behind it. So we can actually interact with that just the same way we do with the folders that currently live on-prem. So if we head over to the file share and the storage account, what we can do is we can interact with that. And you can see we still have the same folders that we saw on that Windows server. So again, the same folders, the same file structure all exists within Azure, just within that storage account now. So what I want to do is actually look at bringing in that secondary server within Seattle. Oh, sorry. We can actually show you how quickly it can create new folders in this file share group. So if we create a new folder on our first server and call it folder 1, because we're dead original with our folder names, we can quickly go back into the portal. It's not there right now, but if we hit refresh on that portal, we can see that the folder's there. Now, again, caveating this with the speed of your internet and how many files you're actually adding into that file sync group might take a wee while for everything to kick in. Now, if we go into the second server, and we can see we've got this server set up, we've created a folder called FileShare02, and it's empty at the moment. It's not part of the file share group, it's not getting any files, but we want to add it in. So what we have to do is go into Windows Admin Center, because we're managing everything with Windows Admin Center, and we can connect into that server. Now, there'll be a blade on the left-hand side called Azure File Sync, and we can activate that. So we can enable that for this server, and Windows Admin Center actually helps us with this process. There is a small agent you have to install on every server, but again, Windows Admin Center will help us through that process and support us on that. So we don't have to go and use up a search engine, try and find that agent, try and install the latest version, and etc., etc. We just go into Windows Admin Center and tell it that we want to add it into File Sync, and it'll install the agent for us. Now, it does take a few minutes, so if we skip ahead, what it will ask us to do once the agent is installed is to log on to our Azure subscription and try and point it towards the file sync group. Because we've already created one, we're just finding that file sync group that we saw our initial server in, and we're adding this new server in. So we have to register the server from here, from locally. And then what we have to do after that is actually go into the Azure portal and complete that registration. So we have to hit a small button on the Azure portal that will register the server as well. So if we go into this, we'll see this in a minute. So we're adding a new server endpoint, and we should have FSO1. That's the new server that we set up. We specify where the path is, where that file share is. We can enable the cloud tiering, like I talked about, how much data we want to preserve on-prem versus having up in the cloud, etc. And all of that can be configured. Now, again, it'll depend on how much data you're syncing, how much files you're doing. But once you go back in, eventually into the server, what you'll see is all that folder structure. And we even got that new one, that folder 1 that we created. Now, we can act just normally on this file server. So we can create a new folder, so folder 2, because again, we're dead creative with our names. And what we can do is we can go back into the Azure portal and see that storage, that folder being synced, or is it synced? I'm never sure, in the Azure portal as well. So we've got that folder 2, and it'll be back on our initial server as well. So you can see that 3-tier connection is working. and there it is on that server as well. So that kind of shows you the capabilities that we have to extend our file servers on-prem and into the cloud. Now, the last thing that Tailwind traders are kind of struggling with is the ability to manage all their servers on-prem, in the cloud, and even in Azure, and in their other cloud as well, because they've actually gone to another cloud provider and put some services there. What they're finding is that the servers are becoming inconsistent. There's differences between each install and each environment, and they want to try and leverage something to bring that all back into place and have that consistency among their environment. And this is where Azure Arc comes into play. Now, Azure Arc is a new tool that Microsoft have released, and I think we announced it at Ignite last year. It's still on in preview at the moment, but it promises a lot in terms of allowing us to manage our servers and keep them into that consistent state. So let's actually have a wee look at this in play. So if we go into our Azure portal, what we want to do is bring up the blade called Azure Arc. Now you'll see we have capabilities to look at servers, Kubernetes clusters, and even SQL databases as well. As I said, it's in preview at the moment, so the capabilities are a little limited, but I have it on great authority that there's lots coming for this tool, so do keep an eye out on it. Now, to enable Azure Arc on your servers, you need to install a small agent onto each server. Now, again, I'm only onboarding one server, so I can actually afford to do this manually. But if you were doing a bulk install of servers, we have documentation around all of that as well. So to onboard, what we have to do is to kind of tell the script what our Azure subscription is, what resource group to put these servers in, and what region that we're using, and also the operating system. Now, if you haven't used Azure tags, I definitely suggest that you have a look at them. They can be quite powerful in terms of management as well. So we're going to apply a tag to this on-prem virtual machine as well. So what that's done is generate a script for us that we have to run on each of our servers. So it's just a PowerShell script, so you can download that script onto your server and then run it just like any other normal PowerShell script. Now, eventually, it will ask you to log in to your Azure subscription. So you put in your credentials and secure your server that way and connect it to your Azure subscription. Once it's installed, we'll be able to go into the Azure portal and we can refresh it. Now, you can see it's got a slightly different icon than normal servers, but it has the same similar interface. You know, we can see the resource group name, we can see the operating system, and we've got a familiar panel down the left-hand side. Now, one of the powerful tools that we can leverage now is actually Azure Policy, which again, if you haven't looked at, please do. It allows you to bring in that consistency. It allows you to apply settings, to audit settings across all of your state, not just virtual machines. You can have it applied at resource groups, managed subscriptions. Different things can be done with Azure Policy. It's really powerful. What we want to do is create a policy that actually installs log analytics onto each of our Azure Arc servers. So what we have to do is we have to find that policy definition, and we have built-in ones. There's a lot in here. You can use any of them. I'm using this example here of installing a log analytics agent. So again, we fill in the parameters, we see what log analytics workspace we're going to use, we remediate it. So if it's not installed, then we give it permission to actually remediate it and carry out that installation task, and click create. Eventually, after the server has collated in and kind of synced in with Azure Policy and all of the agents, what we'll be able to see is that policy being applied and hopefully being 100% compliant with that policy as well. And there we have it. All of our servers, all of that one server that we onboarded is compliant with that policy, and we should be able to go into that server and see the log analytics agent installed. But you can use Azure Policy for anything. I often use it with, there's a policy about setting the time zone on your servers, just to have that consistent view across all of your servers. So there's tons of things you can do with Azure Policy. So in terms of what Azure Arc offers us at the moment, it gives you the ability to onboard your inventory. So you can look at having all your Windows servers, your Linux servers, your on-prem and your cloud servers all really managed from one place and have that visibility of what's happening. Governance and security is a massive thing, right? We want all of our servers to be secure and manageable, and Azure Arc allows us to do that. And we can actually leverage Azure Security Center to manage some of that security element as well. So we can onboard it into the Azure Security Center and see some of the recommendations that we have there as well. We can control how these Azure Arc servers are also accessed and what Azure policies, what Azure kind of features are pushed down to them as well. There's lots that can be onboarded in terms of Azure Arc. And it's really that one-stop shop. And I really need to stop saying that. It's that one single pane of glass to allow you to manage all of your servers. Now, hopefully that's given you a little overview of some of the tools and functionalities that we have within Azure to kind of bring that hybrid model together. What I've done is put together this little blog post with some more resources of where you can find out more about what I've talked about tonight and answer a bit more. Now, I haven't covered everything. There's probably tons of other tools there that I haven't mentioned, but I've just given you a little highlight of some of the ones that I think some of our customers leverage. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
First of all, let's give Sarah a big round of applause. Thank you very much for that. It's awesome. So there's a quick question from YouTube in terms of Azure Update Management. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to uninstall an update using Update Management if, for example, a patch is faulty or causes a problem?
I know you can exclude them. So if you know about a faulty patch, you can exclude them. Not sure if you can uninstall yet, to be honest. I think that was asked a while ago, but I don't know if we've actually released that. I can double check though. But again, that's probably where some of your tiering and grouping your servers. So you wouldn't necessarily patch all your servers on the first time, or I hope you might not. You probably patch your development environment and hopefully you would find the bug in there first and it wouldn't impact too much on production. But yeah, I'll definitely check to see if we can uninstall, but I don't think that functionality is there yet.
Cool. James, you've got your virtual hand raised.
Yeah, cheers. That's a great talk. Thank you for that. So I did notice at the end, it said there was a bullet point saying domain agnostic. So one presumes that then the kind of the Active Directory topology for the Windows servers is not that important, or can it play a big part in this?
To be honest, I'm not sure around that. I imagine that we don't care where it lives. Ultimately, it's an agent that you install. So as long as you have admin rights to that server and the server has the ability to send that data up into Azure, it can be managed. So yeah, you probably don't have to. Are you thinking more along the lines of your Active Directory is synced with your Azure Active Directory and your Azure subscription? Is that?
Well, that too. Obviously, what that flow is between your on-prem and Azure tenant, but also things like GPO and other, and the security model as well, in terms of what, for example, what identity you're granting when you install that agent on your on-prem server. Obviously, you put your credentials to access Azure. What identity is running there, so that then you're aware of what the kind of the profile of your security aspects are.
Yeah, so that's a good few questions there.
No, it was just
no, valid points, absolutely valid points. To be honest, I don't know all of the answers to that. As I said, it's a preview service, so I'll need to take a dig into some of what that looks like. Happy to do that and dig out the documentation and find more info. With any preview service, we probably don't recommend using it within your production environment in case something went wrong or we pulled the service. that's generally what we advise. We say definitely use it, definitely give us some feedback, because we're never going to be able to mature the product without it. So yeah, if there's some concerns around some of that, I'd probably say stay well away from production at the moment until we finalise some of that and some of that data surfaced up.
It looks good. It looks a good way of managing especially a large server estate. So yeah, great. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions, folks? Fantastic. Well, in that case, once again, thank you very much, Sarah. That was great. And I'm sure that there'll be plenty of us who at some point attend the Glasgow Use Group as well. Have you got a date for when that next is?
I want to say 26th of August, if that's a Wednesday that week.
Let's check.
That's the day after the next DevOps Knots, in fact.
Yeah, so 26th of August should be the right date.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. So start in terms of wrapping up then. Let me just quickly share my screen. Oh, sorry. There we go. So this evening we've had both Sarah Lean from Microsoft, who you've just heard, and Manuel Pais from the book Team Topologies earlier this evening. Next month, it is our first birthday, and we have Martin Woodward returning, who's going along to give a talk on lessons learned so far in shifting to remote work at Microsoft. And we also have Michael Gillette, who's a solutions architect at Wind Technologies, coming along to talk about how Betway tests in production and hypothesis-driven development. So, Misha.
Yeah.
Would you like to do the prize draw?
I would love to do the prize draw. Let's do it. I will do a little drum roll. Who's won the JetBrains this month? And the winner is Andy Goldschmidt. And the thing that he did in production was put in a drop rule in a firewall as the very first entry. Dope. You're now locked out of SSH. There we go. So Andy, a JetBrains license will be winging its way to you, probably via Twitter. We will get in touch. And that is all yours for a year.
Fantastic. So let me just let that do that thing again. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending this evening. In terms of Zoom and YouTube, the YouTube will be available right away after this for you to go back and look through and share around and stuff. You know, the speakers that we have every month have been putting such great work into the topics, especially in doing it remotely, and we've been finding that the YouTube side of things has been super helpful for revisiting, especially from our point of view as organizers. It means we can actually go back and pay more attention to them rather than keep on top of Twitter and everything else. But yeah, please feel free to spread the links for DevOps Knots far and wide. The benefit of us all being remote now is that we can take this global, and because I was never happy with just one city. So thank you very much for coming once again, and we will see you all on August the 25th.
Yeah, see you there for our first birthday.
Thank you all. Great sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Mm.